In the 1st and 2nd centuries, a Christian sect found a wide following throughout the Roman world. They weren't your normal run-of-the-mill Christians. They had beliefs that were nothing like those of any Christian sect today, and they drew the ire of many Christian leaders at the time. What we know about them was limited to the writings of their critics, until a stunning find in the mid-20th century shed new light on them. Learn more about Gnosticism and the Gnostics, their beliefs, and the reaction to them on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by Quince. I speak from first-hand experience when I tell you that dressing properly is the key to surviving winter. For the ultimate cold weather necessities made from premium materials, you've got to check out Quince. I literally write almost every episode of this podcast when I'm sitting on the couch covered in my Quince fisherman's blanket. It's incredibly warm, it's heavy, and it looks great. It is the best blanket that I've ever owned, and I love it. By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, Quince passes the savings on to you. Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. They use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. Luxuriate in coziness without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/daily for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/daily to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/daily. This episode is sponsored by Mint Mobile. One of the things I've noticed traveling around the world is how much more expensive American mobile phone plans are. In most countries I've visited, data and phone plans were very affordable. In the US, they tend to be really expensive. Mint Mobile has solved that problem by offering some of the most affordable mobile plans that you can find. All Mint Mobile wireless plans are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. Mint Mobile's secret is that they sell wireless services online. They don't have retail stores or salespeople. Moving to Mint Mobile is super easy. They use the same cell towers and networks as major carriers, and you can use your current phone and phone number. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/EED. That's mintmobile.com/EED. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/EED. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabit on unlimited plan. Additional tax, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Gnosticism is a difficult subject to discuss because our knowledge of Gnosticism is limited, and there's no general agreed-upon definition of what Gnosticism is or who exactly the Gnostics were. The Gnostics rose to prominence in the 1st and 2nd centuries, very soon after the rise of Christianity. If you've ever heard of the Gnostics or have come across it in the past, it was probably in the context of the Gnostic heresy. And that's because historically, the Gnostics were the losers, and history, in this case quite literally, was written by the winners. One note before I go any further. I am going to be using the term orthodox for the rest of this episode. I'm going to be using orthodox with a small o, not a capital O. I am not referring to Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches that exist today. However, those churches and others would fall under the small o Orthodox belief system that I'll be referring to. The term Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. Gnostics believe salvation came through special esoteric knowledge about the divine and humanity's true nature. Gnosticism was not a single unified religion, but a broad and diverse movement, often intertwined with early Christianity, Judaism, and Greco-Roman thought. Again, Gnosticism was not one single movement, and its leaders had differing views, which is why it's so hard to define. But there were some tenets that were commonly shared. The first is the idea of dualism. Gnostics typically saw the universe as a battleground between two opposing forces, the spirit, which is good, and matter, which is evil. The material world was often viewed as corrupt, imperfect, or even a trap created by a malevolent deity. The material world was said to be created by a lesser deity known as the Demiurge, which was sometimes identified as the god of the Old Testament. The Demiurge was often portrayed as ignorant or evil. The view of the physical world as being evil led some Gnostics to become ascetics who didn't take care of their bodies. Some Gnostics concluded that Jesus didn't have a physical body for this reason. They contended that he must have been a purely spiritual being. Above the Demiurge was a supreme, unknowable god or source of divine light, far removed from the material world. The Demiurge was associated with impure evil matter, but the unknowable god was associated with the pure good spirit. This led some Gnostics to accept a light form of polytheism. While they believed in one ultimate higher god, they also believed in lesser deities below that supreme god. Gnostics also believe that within humans exists a divine spark or fragment of the supreme God. This spark is trapped in the physical body and can only be freed through gnosis, or knowledge. Unlike Orthodox Christianity, again, small o Orthodox, which emphasizes faith and grace, Gnostics believe salvation came through acquiring secret knowledge, aka gnosis, that revealed the divine spark and the true nature of reality. The idea that salvation came from secret knowledge led some Gnostics to lead hedonistic lifestyles, the exact opposite of other Gnostics. If they were guaranteed salvation from secret knowledge, once they had that knowledge, there was really no reason to lead a good and moral life. Gnostics also describe the universe and human history in terms of complex myths involving divine beings, archons or rulers, and the struggle of the soul. Some of these myths were extremely complicated, and it would take the better part of this episode just to go through them. Much, but not all, of what we knew about the Gnostics came from their critics, in particularly one person, Irenaeus of Lyon. His most famous work was Adversus Haereses, which is Latin for against heresies. It was written around the year 180, and it's one of the most important early Christian works addressing heretical teachings, particularly Gnosticism. His text is a 5-part polemic aimed at refuting Gnostic doctrines and defending the Orthodox Christian faith, and it provides one of the earliest comprehensive critiques of Gnosticism. Irenaeus was not the only church father to criticize the Gnostics, however. Tertullian was a 2nd and 3rd century Christian theologian and apologist from Carthage. Known for his sharp rhetoric, Tertullian attacked Gnostic doctrines, especially their rejection of the resurrection of the flesh. Hippolytus of Rome was a 3rd century Christian theologian, scholar, and the first known antipope. His refutation of all heresies systematically denounced Gnostic cosmology and theology. Origen of Alexandria was a 3rd century Christian theologian, scholar, and philosopher. Though accused of having Gnostic leanings, Origen defended Orthodox Christianity and criticized Gnostic interpretations of Scripture. Based on these critiques of Gnosticism, we know that there were several different leaders who led different Gnostic factions. One group was the Sethians. This was the group that revered Seth, the 3rd son of Adam and Eve, as the bringer of Gnosis. Another were the Valentinians, who were the followers of Valentinus, a prominent Gnostic teacher who developed a sophisticated theological system. The Basilidians were a group founded by Basilides of Alexandria who taught another complex cosmology. There were also the Marcionites. They followed the teachings of Marcion of Sinope. They were not strictly Gnostic, but they shared dualistic ideas and rejected the Old Testament. One of the reasons why Gnosticism was able to find fertile ground was that Christianity wasn't very organized in the 2nd century. For starters, depending on who the emperor was, many Christians had to be underground in the practice of their religion. Second, there was no central organized structure. Each community was independent and was run by a local bishop. That meant some local churches would often go their own way and develop their own doctrines. The organization of the Christian church wouldn't come about until the rise of the Emperor Constantine in the late 4th century. And finally, there was no set scripture. The Bible as we know it didn't exist yet, at least in the form of a set canon of books. All the various New Testament books were passed around as separate letters and texts. In addition to the books that would become part of the canon of the Bible, there were also apocryphal books that were circulated as well that didn't become part of the Bible's canon. In the case of the Gnostics, they used many apocryphal books. The biggest breakthrough in our knowledge of the Gnostics and their beliefs came in 1945 via a remarkable find outside the town of Nag Hammadi, Egypt. A collection of 13 leather-bound codices containing over 50 texts was unearthed by local farmers. These texts, written in Coptic and dating to the 4th century, are believed to be translations of earlier Greek works. These texts provided invaluable insight into the beliefs, cosmology, and practices of the Gnostic movement, which had previously been known primarily through the critiques of early church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian. One of the most famous Gnostic texts was the Gospel of Thomas. It's a sayings gospel containing 114 attributed sayings of Jesus, emphasizing self-knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. And the Gospel of Thomas is different from the other apocryphal book known as the Infant Gospel of Thomas, which covers the early life of Jesus, including a story of him striking one of his playmates dead. The Apocryphon of John revealed a detailed Gnostic creation myth describing the supreme God, divine emanations, the fall of Sophia, the divine emanation that governed wisdom, and the creation of the flawed material world by the Demiurge. The Gospel of Philip explored sacramental and mystical themes, offering alternative interpretations of Christian rituals like baptism and marriage. Other significant works include the Gospel of Truth, attributed to Valentinus, which presents a poetic meditation on salvation through gnosis, and the Tripartite Tractate, a theological exploration of the relationship between the divine, the cosmos, and humanity. The library also contained texts like The Thunder, Perfect Mind, a mystical poem with a divine feminine voice, and the Hypostasis of the Archons, which represents Genesis through a Gnostic lens, portraying the Archons and Demiurge as oppressive rulers. If you have even the slightest understanding of Christian theology, regardless of the Christian tradition, you probably realize that the beliefs of the Gnostics are far removed from Orthodox, again, small o, Christianity. So, how did this happen? How did the Gnostics develop this theology and claim it was Christianity when it was so far from the Orthodox beliefs at the time? The Nag Hammadi Library went a long way in helping researchers understand where the Gnostic beliefs probably originated from. It is most likely that the Gnostic ideas were developed well before the rise of Christianity, and that those ideas were later attached to Christian beliefs as Christianity began to spread. Gnostic ideas were deeply influenced by Hellenistic thought, particularly the philosophy of Plato, known as Platonism. Plato's distinction between the imperfect material world and the perfect transcendent world of forms resonated with Gnostic dualism, which viewed the material world as corrupt and inferior to the spiritual realm. Additionally, Middle Platonism and Neo-Pythagoreanism contributed to Gnostic ideas of a hierarchy of divine emanations known as aeons, as well as the ineffable supreme God. Gnosticism also inherited themes from Jewish apocalyptic literature, such as the battle between cosmic forces of good and evil, as well as mystical traditions like Merkaba mysticism, which explored visions of the heavenly realms and God's throne. Gnostics reinterpreted the Hebrew scriptures, often portraying the God of the Old Testament, which they considered to be the Demiurge, as a flawed or malevolent entity who created the material world. Ancient religions of the Near East, including Zoroastrianism and Babylonian mythology, contributed dualistic cosmologies and narratives of cosmic struggle. For example, Zoroastrianism has a sharp distinction between Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light, and Anra Manyu, the Lord of Darkness, which parallel the Gnostic themes of a spiritual battle between forces of light and darkness. Gnosticism also borrowed from Greco-Roman mystery religions such as those dedicated to Isis, Mithras, or Dionysus, which emphasize secret rituals and knowledge that promise salvation or enlightenment for initiates. So based on the teachings from the Nag Hammadi Library, Gnosticism probably existed before the rise of Christianity in several different forms, and then was grafted on to various Christian teachings. So, what happened to the Gnostics? Why didn't Gnosticism survive into the modern world? Well, Gnosticism was considered heretical by most of the early Christian church. As I mentioned, the church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian and Hippolytus wrote extensively against Gnosticism, condemning it as a perversion of Christian doctrine. Their views spread from church to church, becoming the dominant view. The Gnostics were never more than a very loud minority of Christians. As Christianity became more organized, especially after becoming the Roman Empire's state religion in the 4th century, Gnostic texts were banned and their followers were persecuted. After the Council of Hippo in 393 codified the books of the Bible, there was now a reference for local churches to know what scriptures they could actually use and, more importantly, which ones they should not use. The pressure from Orthodox churches and the Roman Empire was simply not an environment for Gnosticism to thrive. Gnosticism was one of the first major heresies of the young Christian religion. In terms of how much it deviated from Orthodox theology, it was probably the greatest one. There would be a host of other heresies that would engulf the Christian world over the next several centuries, including Arianism, Donatism, and Nestorianism, just to name a few. Most of these heresies were actually rather minor disagreements over points of theology compared to the massive differences of Gnosticism. Despite the fact that there are almost no direct contributions from Gnosticism to modern religions today, the reaction to Gnosticism did help form early Christianity. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Benji Long and Cameron Kieffer. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon, including the show's producers. Your support helps me put out a show every single day. And also, Patreon is currently the only place where Everything Everywhere Daily merchandise is available to the top tier of supporters. If you'd like to talk to other listeners of the show and members of the Completionist Club, you can join the Everything Everywhere Daily Facebook group or Discord server. Links to everything are in the show notes.